Hey everyone, I'm Ari here with Rachel, and we're your hosts for the Merry Writer podcast. This week we're on episode 227, and we're asking, what are your book pet peeves? Before we dive into the topic, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening if you haven't already. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with friends and feel free to write a review. Okay, before I discuss actual story content, I'm going to discuss some pet peeves about parts of the book themselves. And I will add this quick disclaimer. I appreciate if we're talking about traditionally published authors, you might not have control over some of this. Anyway, let's get into it. Things I hate. Books in a series that do not have the number on them, like on the front cover or on the spine. Seriously, I hate buying books only to find out it's book 4 of a series of 8. What is that? Please stop doing that. And that leads me to books that don't have a series title. So I don't know that it's a series when I buy the book. There's me thinking it's a standalone, and it isn't. And sometimes the blurb doesn't make it clear that it's part of a series. I hate that, especially if I can't find book 1 anywhere. And I'm just holding on to book 4, and nowhere can I find book 1. This is going to be a very ranty episode. So let's move to blurbs. That's the bit on the back, that nice bit of cover that sort of pulls you in. Blurbs that spoil something that I didn't know from an earlier book. This ties into the issue I have above. If I grab a book and I see that it has a 2 or a 3 or 4, whatever, on the spine, then I know not to read the blurb. And I will instead put it back and hunt down book 1. However, if you don't put anything about what number it is on the book, and then I read the back, and then it's like, oh, after the death of such a character, and it's like, oh great, now I know how the book 1 ends. I hate it. I actually hate it as well on websites. I'm just going to quickly make a comment. I appreciate that the newest book coming out is often the one that's right in front on the page when you go onto an author's website, but I would rather the blurb be hidden if it's not book 1, because I have gone into a book onto an author's website and the book cover is beautiful, and I'm looking and I go over to the blurb, and I don't realize it's a series, because again, even on websites they don't always put it, and then again it's told me something about book 1 that's the ending, because this is book 2 or 3, and I am really tired of it.
I 110% agree with that. It is really annoying to see a pretty cover on the shelf, and then you pick up the book and you realize, you start reading the blurb to see what it's all about, and you realize that, yeah, this is actually book 5, and the main character's love interest is actually dead. Like, okay, but they were there like 2 books ago, apparently. And it's so frustrating. And on that note, I just got to add, I don't like going to the bookstore and picking up a book and then flipping it over to read the blurb, only to find review praise instead. Then I feel like I gotta go hunting for the book blurb. With hardcovers, the blurb is usually on the front inside dust jacket flap thingy. So usually when I pick up a hardcover book, that's the first place I'll look before I turn it over. But I have seen some paperbacks where they do that. The blurb is on the hardcover, but they failed to put the blurb anywhere on the paperback. They just copied and pasted the dust jacket as the paperback cover. And it's so frustrating. And I also know that paperbacks usually come out months or a year after the hardcover. So at that point, you should probably quote unquote know what the book is anyway. You've probably heard about it at some point, but no, I really, as someone who doesn't read reviews before buying a book, I just buy a book if I think the blurb sounds good and if it sounds up my alley. So I really don't care if if other big author names liked the book or not. No offense. Good for you, but no thank you.
I think that's so annoying, especially because sometimes the review is literally just a tour de force, spectacular. And it's like, that doesn't even tell me anything. You're not even saying this ripped my heart out, it was so impressively emotional or anything. It's just some rubbish that you don't need on the back. So yeah, 100% agree with that. So annoying. But let's go back to annoying authors. Authors, please, can you put the books from your back catalogue in the front matter, not the back? I want to see what else you've written at the front. Mainly because whenever I go to a bookshop, I look at the book, and if it sounds interesting, I will always look at to see what the back catalogue is of that author, because I might see another book, or I might go hunting for that book, or even go to the counter and say, could you get me this book in? I don't like scanning to the back of the book, because I have in the past scanned not far enough and caught something, and I've been like, oh no, I've just in the end. That's not great. So put it in the front. That is where I will look for it. I would prefer it. And yeah, just seriously, it's not that difficult. I'm sure it used to always be in the front matter.
And this kind of goes along with what you were saying earlier about writing the series number on the cover, because if you're not going to add the series number to your book cover, then having this catalog in the front matter is super important and useful to any readers. Cozy mystery novels are notorious for this. They often don't have the series number anywhere on the cover or on the spine. Usually, depending on the publisher, the first book will have like a little like stamp on it on the cover that says first in a new series. So you can easily pick out the first book, but any book after that, I have to take it off the shelf, open it to the front, and look at the book catalog, because they'll typically be listed in order, in the series order. And I mean, that's all well and good, but I feel like I'm going on a scavenger hunt trying to find the next book in the series, and it can get a little annoying.
I think it comes that everyone assumes you're going to buy online, and you can just go on. And obviously, if you're on Amazon, it will say like, blah, 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 book one in the series of blah, blah, blah. And that's great. But not everyone buys from books. We try and go to bookshops, to give the bookshops more footfall and support that kind of business. And it's just really annoying. And I don't want to pull my phone out at a bookshop and start Googling to find out which book is the one. Because sometimes I don't have my phone on me, because I try not to carry it around. And sometimes it's dead. And sometimes I just get really bad Wi-Fi. So yeah.
But something I do, I'll sometimes just take pictures of the book cover so that I can figure it out later. So I'm not sitting in the middle of a book aisle Googling, but I forget that I take the picture. So months later, when I'm going through my photos, I see all these random pictures of book covers. I'm like, I don't know what this is. I don't remember seeing this, and I delete it. And then guess what? You just lost a potential sale.
Okay, this one I appreciate. Again, if this is traditional publishing, you might not have any control over this. Books in a different size in a series. I think I speak for most readers, when I say, please stop making books in a series different sizes. If your later books are so huge that they need to be double the size of all the other books, make it 2 books, or do a better job at editing. I know that's a bit rude, because maybe you need all of it. But I have found that the books I've got where one of the books is massive, it never needed to be that big. I've read it and thought, you know what, there's about 4 or 5 chapters you could have just cut. They were filler, definitely filler. I don't know. I don't like it. It doesn't fit well on my shelf. I hate those huge tomes. You can barely pick them up and read them, especially I like paperbacks, not hardbacks. I don't even like to think how heavy a hardback is. But when you're trying to hold these, they're about the size of a binder, some of them, and they're so thick. And it's like, how are you supposed to read that comfortably? Maybe it's just me, but I hate it. And I will get angry if I find a series where like the last 3 books are a completely different size. And they're not always, it's not like the 1 to 6 is one size, and then 7 to 10 is another. It'll be 1 to 6 is one size, 7's a different size, 8 and 9 are a different size, and 10's a different size as well. And it's like, you know what? I don't want to spend my money on you anymore.
It's funny that you mention it. I do agree. I definitely agree. But when you said books in different sizes in a series, I was thinking of height, not like the thickness or how many pages, because just in terms of height, please, yes, make them all the same size. There is a reason why most readers buy a series all in hardcover or all in paperback. It's so that it looks uniform on their bookshelf. And I actually have a series, I can't think of the name of it at the top of my head now, but I do know I own a series where the first couple of books are like the 5x9 or whatever the size is. And then the rest of the series is like 6x9. They're slightly taller than the rest. And I'm like, who authorized this? Who thought this was a good idea? It's not okay. It looks weird. And then different bookshelves, the shelves have different heights. So it's like you can fit part of the series on one shelf, but then the next book, it's got to go on the bottom or the top shelf, because that's the bigger. No, thank you. Please don't.
Oh yeah, I did mean like height wise. Obviously, if a book is thick, a book is thick. But if it's a massively tall and doubly thick, it's like I'm sure you could have broken that down into two books. You know, if we're making The Hobbit into three movies, you can make your giant book into two books. I'm gonna say it. But yeah, I can't remember. I think was it Stephen King's The Tower, is that series that had like several books in different sizes. And I do have other. I think one of the Joe Abercrombie book series. Some of them are bigger. Adrian Tchaikovsky, Shadow of the App series, the first like 10 are perfect, and then the next ones just get bigger and bigger. And there's one that sits on a completely different shelf on its own because it's bigger than everything. And it's just so frustrating. And I think now that we are very much into aesthetics with books, it's not just about buying and reading books, it's about buying and displaying books. It's important.
Time to donate those books that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I'll just get them in ebook. I'll just get them in ebook. It's like if I find too many massive sizes, it's like, right, you're gonna be an ebook. You're not taking up too much space.
There you go. That's problem solved right there.
Okay, with that, we're going to move on to like content itself. And this is not a big list because I have a lot of issues with things, but that's just because I'm a grouchy person these days. But if you are writing a book in first person and you have two or more different POVs, please could you include the name of the relevant character at the top of the relevant chapters? That really should be a given. And I think 90% of the books that are dual POV or more, it's usually one chapter per person, one chapter per character. So it's not that difficult to just make sure that you put that character's name. Because I have read books that didn't do that. And I'm like 3 chapters in going, this is confusing. And then I've realized we've actually switched to a different female character. And it's like, yeah, I didn't get that. It just felt weird. And now obviously that part of that is because they didn't write it so well that it made it clear. But I think it would help, especially if you have 3 or more.
People read fast and then they start to skim sometimes. So yeah, it's definitely helpful to have that header at the top just so that you can see, even put it in the header of each page. You can do that. I mean, some books have like the chapter title, number on the header. You could do that with the character POV name. But speaking of chapters, I don't know if this is really a pet peeve or more so a personal preference of mine, but please don't make your chapters obnoxiously long, or at the very least, have frequent page breaks. Because if a chapter is more than 12 pages, I get turned off by it. I need something on the shorter side because I'm a slow reader. And if I can't finish a chapter in one sitting, then I need to be able to have a good place to stop. Otherwise, I'm not going to read that chapter until I have the time, which means it'll take like 6 years to get through a book, if I even finish it at all.
Or you could just do what Terry Pratchett did in his books and just have no chapters.
Oh, no, see, I don't even read those. I'm like, absolutely not. If it's like a big chunk of nope, no. I mean, I know it's broken into paragraphs and stuff, but like just it's an immediate nope for me.
It's the fact that I've read that series so often, and I always go back to the same like 3 books. And every time I pick one of those books to read, I forget that it's got no chapters. And I keep waiting for the chapter so I can put my bookmark in and go to sleep. And then it's like, oh yeah, there are no chapters. It's just one long, endless story.
See, I always count the pages to a chapter before I start reading the chapter. Even if I have the rest of the day to read, I will finish a chapter and then count the pages ahead to see how long it'll be.
I love that these are very personal rants, and I love it. Because obviously I know that everyone's going to do this, and the people are probably listening to this going, what are these 2 women on? But it's like, you know what? It's fine. And speaking of that, if all of your characters have long names full of apostrophes and a collection of Z's and Y's, stop it. We're not saying you have to chuck in the odd Kevin, but I'd like at least some of the names to be pronounceable. I have to say, the main characters need to have pronounceable names. If it's got a long name with a couple of apostrophes, could you have a way that it could be shortened? If it's this long name, make sure the first 3 letters are what everyone's going to call them. Are they a Kai? Are they Adele? You know, it's something that you could shorten it down to. That is nice, because I'll be honest, if I have got to go through 7 different characters and they've all got long, complicated names, and then the places have got long, complicated names, I'm going to struggle. It took me ages to read the series because I read the first few pages of this series. I can't remember what it was called because I did actually eventually get through it. And then I got rid of it because it was okay. But it took so long because everybody's name was complicated, every location was complicated, and then they had terminology that was also complicated. And it was a really big slog, and I hated every minute of it. The first book, the next ones were okay. And I don't know why I pushed myself through. I think sometimes you get that, well, I bought it, I might as well. And with that said, please put a pronunciation guide at the front, because I hate getting to the end only to realize I've been saying the name wrong in my head, because I guarantee that's how it is now. I am not learning it differently. I've gone through the whole book with these characters, and that's what they're called. So put it at the front or don't even bother.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, if you do need to have a pronunciation guide for your characters' names, especially if it's most of the cast of characters, then absolutely give some of them a nickname or change their names or play around with the letters so that you can pronounce it correctly at first glance rather than needing the guide. Because as kind of what Ari just said, the pronunciation is going to slow me down. I'm going to make up how to pronunciate the name on my own. Even if I look at the guide and I know the correct way to pronounce it, it's still going to slow me down in the story, because then I'm going to have to remember, wait, what did the pronunciation guide say? And it's going to jar me out of the story, and I'm still going to make up my own pronunciation because I'm not going to remember the guide at first glance. Especially, yeah, because if a character isn't introduced until like chapter 15, but they're in the pronunciation guide, I'm not going to remember that for 15 chapters. It's just not going to happen. That's just me, not going to happen. But also, with that said, if you do have that pronunciation guide, please don't make it a packet. I've seen books with pronunciation guides, map descriptions, like place descriptions, even though they have a picture of a map, family trees, hierarchies, etc. And it's like 10 pages long. And I'm sorry, but I'm not reading it. I can't. I won't. I'm sorry.
Some of that is useful. Pronunciation guide, map, very important. But if it's other things that you don't actually need to know, like family tree, if you can get that enough throughout the story and you don't need to know that, that should just be bonus material at the end. That should be something you give to your your newsletter subscribers, or put on your website. But yeah, I do hate having to like trudge through a lot of stuff at the beginning that's not necessary. But yeah, pronunciation guide is, put it at the front. Seriously. Okay, this is just a random thing that just gets on my nerves. Does every male main character now have to be dark, brooding, built like a tank, green with jealousy? I mean, seriously? I don't mind characters with some morality issues. Love me an anti-hero, seriously. I've got to stop saying the word seriously. But I am tired of toxic love interest that never seems to actually be redeemable, or when they find their soulmate, that's when they change, but only for her. You know, they're still a possessive douchebag and aggressive to everyone else. It's bad enough that life is like that with a lot of people. Can we not fill every fantasy book up with that and make them out to be like, oh, this is the hero? It's like he really cares about, you know, his love interest, but everyone else he's a dick to. Honestly, feels like everyone's writing that. And I appreciate that might be what you really want to write. I'm just tired of seeing it right now. You know, I'm not saying they have to be the softest person. Again, love myself an anti-hero. Anti-heroes are fine. But if they're not redeemable in any way, if they're literally just showing some of the worst, crappiest traits, and they're not growing as a person, I'm out.
Well, that's just it. They have to grow. They have to develop. I mean, it's becoming kind of a cliche at this point, I feel like. So I really don't have anything to add to that, but I concur.
Okay, with that, I'll end this episode. It was very ranty and very like specific to us, but that just shows you a little bit of what we're into and what we're not into. So with that, we're going to turn it over to you guys. What are some of your book pet peeves? Obviously, it can be the content inside the book, or it could be the books themselves. Let us know your answers in the comments so we can chat. Remember, we do release new episodes every Wednesday. Next week, we're going to be discussing how to manage writer's block, and we'll be joined by a guest. To ensure you don't miss it, hit the subscribe button on your way out. And as always, thanks for listening to the Merry Writer Podcast. We'll see you next week. This podcast is brought to you by, Writer's Block. We hate our brains. The music titled Inspired is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.